Welcome to this ART302 video on classifying musical instruments, and particularly traditional African instruments. There are two common ways to classify musical instruments. The first is to group them according to the way they're grouped in a Western orchestra, and those are the four families: strings, woodwind, brass, and percussion. I spoke about this in the last video, so if you haven't watched that yet, please do. You can also find the information on the Western orchestra classifications in your textbook. There is another way to group instruments, and that is according to how their sound is produced. And that is what we're going to deal with in this video, and particularly African instruments, which are grouped in this way. The method of classifying instruments according to how their sounds are produced is known as the Hornbostel-Sachs method. And this is because it was created by Erich von Hornbostel and Kurt Sachs. And this method has been around since 1914. The reason that it came about was because it became quite difficult to use the four orchestral families, strings, woodwind, brass, and percussion, to classify many non-orchestral instruments. We think here particularly about the native instruments of countries that don't conform to the orchestral families, which is a very Western idea of music. So non-Western instruments often didn't fit into these families. So a new method was required, and this is what gave rise to the Hornbostel-Sachs method. This method is actually preferred by musicologists being people who study music and the history of music particularly, for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's more specific. It contains both categories and subcategories, which make it look a bit like a family tree of instruments. It is more inclusive. All musical instruments can be categorized in this method, including those from the orchestra, whereas the same is not true of the orchestral groupings. And it is more accurate. Instruments are grouped according to how the sound is produced, rather than according to where the composer places them, which might be the case sometimes with the Western orchestra. So there are four main categories in the Hornbostel-Sachs method, and we're going to deal with each of them individually. They are membranophones, chordophones, aerophones, and idiophones. There is a separate category, which obviously was not around in 1914 when this method was pioneered, but has come about more recently, which are electrophones. These are electrified instruments, and we think maybe things like electric guitar would fit in here. We're not going to deal with this category in this video, but just be aware that this category also exists. So the first category, the membranophones, if you look at the word membranophones, it looks similar to the word membrane. And this classifies our drums or anything which has a membrane pulled over a hollow frame of wood or clay. In order to create the sound, this membrane will vibrate to produce a sound. And like the instruments of the Western orchestra, these can be tuned to be either higher or lower in pitch. If a drum is larger and the membrane on top is looser, the sound is going to be lower. As we start to tighten the membrane, the sound becomes higher. And as we create drums that are smaller, the sound tends to become higher as well. Different tones can be produced on membranophones by hitting the drum in different ways and in different places. For example, we can create a bass slap, where we maybe hit the rim of the drum with the fingers, so it's quite a high-pitched sound. A muffle, where we hit the drum head, so the middle of the drum, with a cupped palm. Or the open slap is where we also hit the drum head, but this time with an open palm, which gives a sort of brighter, louder sound. Membranophones are classified according to the shape of the resonating body of the instrument. So within this area of membranophones, we have a number of different membranophones, They're classified according to the shape of the resonating body of the instrument. Let's see what some of these different membranophones are. So first of all, we've got our tubular drums. Tubular drums are cylindrical, conical, they're black barrels, long, they can be waisted, sort of in an hourglass shape, like the picture on the left. They can be in a goblet shape, which is, if you think about a wine goblet, a stem at the base. Or they can be footed, so they can have feet around the bottom of the drum, as in the example on the right. So these are all our tubular drums, and you'll see the resonating body is in a sort of a tube-like shape. We then have our kettle drums or vessel drums, and these have rounded bottoms. Our frame drums, such as a tambourine, is when a membrane is stretched over a frame. This is a friction drum. A friction drum is where the sound is created by some kind of friction as the stick is run up and down through a hole in the membrane. So our other membranophones have sound created by when we beat them. But this is different, as in the player runs a stick through the hole in the membrane in order to create the sound. And our last category are merlitons. This is where the membrane vibrates by blowing air across it. These are the only membranophones that are not drums. And here we have an example of a merlitone. Here, this is a kazoo, which we can see a child blowing. And this example also just shows us that our Hornbostel-Sachs method of categorization categorizes every kind of instrument that creates sound. So we wouldn't necessarily always think of a children's instrument like this being something that one would be able to categorize. But as this method is so inclusive, even that has a place in the Hornbostel-Sachs method. Right, our next category are chordophones. And in a chordophone, the sound is produced by the vibration of the strings. We can liken this to the string family in the Western orchestra. Strings can be plucked by the fingers or hit with wooden beaters. And these instruments normally also have a resonator, which will amplify the original sound. If you think about our example of a violin, for example, that wooden body of the instrument is the resonator, and the sound is amplified in that resonator. So what are some examples of chordophones? First, here we have our musical bow. The musical bow is probably the oldest and the simplest chordophone. It was developed from the hunting bow and arrow, and it is a single string stretched from one end of a wooden bow to the other. Often a calabash is attached as an amplifying sound box, and you can see that in the picture over there. These can be plucked or hit with a stick or a bow. So that's a sort of traditional African instrument that would fit into our chordophone family. Another South African instrument that you may be familiar with is the rumkey. You may have seen this castrol oil tin on the left before. Traditionally, a rumkey would have a calabash as the resonator, as in the example on the right. But due to urbanization and in modern times, empty oil cans have started to be used as substitutes. Other chordophones, here we have a zither. In a zither, the strings are stretched across, over, or inside the resonator. We also have a lute, which is a medieval instrument. And in this instrument, the strings are stretched across the resonator and up a neck. They can also be plucked or bowed. And our final one over here is the lyre. Here the strings leave the resonator at right angles to an edge and run up to a crossbar that is held away from the resonator. So all of these instruments you can see have got strings, and these strings can be plucked or bowed in order to create sound, and that's what makes them all chordophones. Our next family are our aerophones, and like the word aero suggests, the sound is created by vibrating air. So these are instruments you have to blow on. The pitch of the instrument depends on the length of the pipe, and our rule that we've learned from our Western instruments is the same. So the shorter the pipe, the higher the pitch of the sound. The longer the pipe, the lower the pitch of the sound. Our aerophones are further grouped according to what causes the air to begin vibrating. So let's look at some different examples of aerophones. Firstly, we have whistles, like our common recorder. And in whistles, the air is blown at the sharp edge of the instrument, so right in the top. Second, we have our blowhole instruments. Here, the air is blown across the hole. If we think about, for example, if you had a bottle and you blew across the top, and sometimes you can create a bit of a musical sound that way, or a pitched sound. That's exactly the same way that you would play your blowhole instruments. So these are things like the panpipes or the fife. That's a fife over there, which is like a shorter and smaller flute. We have our reed instruments, which are from our woodwind family. And here the vibration is caused by the vibration of a reed. We have single reed instruments like the saxophone, and double reed instruments like the oboe. The example here is a cup mouthpiece. Here the player buzzes his or her lips against a mouthpiece. The instrument we have here is a bugle. This instrument is not in the Western orchestra, but the way that you create the sound would be similar to the way you create the sound in a trumpet or a trombone. And finally, we have free aerophones. So the vibrations of the air around them is what causes the noise. For example, a spinning top. And here's another example of how anything that creates a sound fits into the Hornbostel-Sachs method. Our final category are our idiophones. Now, idiophones have to be hit or shaken in order to create some kind of a sound. And they're made from naturally sonorous or self-sounding materials, so wood, stone, or metal. In idiophones, it's the vibration of the instrument itself that is the main source of the musical sound. Idiophones are classified according to what you do to make them vibrate. So here, they're classified according to how you play them. Some different types of idiophones. Firstly, we have percussion idiophones. And in percussion idiophones, we have to hit them with a stick, a beater, or a clapper. And here we've got a sort of a xylophone made of wood, which is an example. And you can even see the beaters resting on the top of that instrument. Second, we've got idiophones that need to be shaken in order for sound to be created. So here we have maracas. And we also have jingles. So the jingles on the left would be tied around a leg or an arm to create sound. Next, we have concussion idiophones. Concussion idiophones is where you have to clash two of the same things together in order to create a sound. The examples we have here are castanets on the left and claves on the right. But this would also be the cymbals would fit in here because it's two of the same things hit together. Our next category are our scraped idiophones. Here we have to scrape a stick across a set of notches or corrugations on the instrument to create sound. And here we have a washboard on the left and a gyro on the right. Our next example are stamping idiophones. So we have to stamp on the ground to create, or on some kind of a hard surface to create some sound. And this example here are tap shoes. And our final category are plucked idiophones. Here, a thin tongue of metal or bamboo vibrates when it is plucked. And our example that we have here is a thumb piano.